Money for nothing. Let's get dialed in. Billions, yes, billions of dollars will be spent between the campaigns of presumptive Democrat nominee Kamala Harris and President Trump ahead of the November election. On a local level, Dade Phelan and David Covey spent a record-breaking amount of money to the tune of millions while vying for Phelan's seat in the Texas House. Phelan, of course, spent the lion's share of that sum, winning re-election by a razor-thin margin, with the help of his Democrat friends. In fact, some of his Democrat allies, like Jefferson County Sheriff Zena Stevens, even donated to the campaign. How did we arrive at a point where such exorbitant sums of money are being spent on political campaigns? After all, a Texas state representative is paid only $7,200 per year, a figure that has not changed since 1975 and falls exponentially below the poverty line. Is there too much money changing hands in politics? Tonight's guest says yes, and he has a few ideas on where we go from here. Joining me now is political manager of an organization called American Promise, Matt Howerton. Matt, welcome to Texas Talkin.
Hey, Shilo, thanks so much for having me. Excited to talk about a very important issue and a very exciting opportunity in Texas right now.
As am I. And in that vein, why don't you tell us a little bit about what American Promise is, what its objectives are, and how you plan to accomplish those?
Yes, sir. American Promise is a nonprofit, cross-partisan organization fighting to win a constitutional amendment for the American people to address money in politics, particularly dark money.
Okay, and how does American Promise define dark money? Because that's a term that I've heard many times throughout the course of even local campaigns, but I don't think if I grabbed 10 people off the street and asked them to tell me what dark money is, I'd get the same answer across all 10.
Yeah, it's like everybody knows it's bad, but they're not quite sure why. So I'm happy
Right.
to go into that just a little bit. So dark money is simply referring to money that is in our political system that is not traceable. You can't follow the money. You don't know where it came from. My big concern is national security. Where is the money from overseas going? Is it coming to influence our elections? Is the
Especially
Chinese
from our
Communist?
adversaries.
Yes, sir. Is the Chinese Communist Party taking advantage of this vulnerability? So there's a lot of ways to look at it. And campaign finance, it's that term may seem boring to a lot of people, but it's so important. You could take almost any issue that the audience cares about, and it's being influenced one way or another by dark money.
So give us, if you could, Matt, a couple of examples of untraceable money that would be characterized as dark money.
Sure. So there was a TV ad that went on the air a few years ago during the Abbott's last reelection. And it was targeting not only him, Governor Abbott, but Lieutenant Governor Patrick, as well as Attorney General Ken Paxton.
A couple
And
of
I want
guys
to
that
tell
I
you how
happen
it
to like.
yeah. And I'll tell you how it started. It said three men, and it was talking about the storm. And it said, tried to insinuate that they were at fault. At the end of the ad, instead of saying paid for by a PAC or paid for by a candidates committee, it was paid for by an LLC. And that LLC has no obligation to reveal its donors. So we were able to trace the organization to a Virginia PO box, and that's where the trail essentially went cold. So that's just one example of how we don't know where the money came from. We don't know what their intention was, but we know that they made a sizable ad buy to influence the outcome of a statewide election. And for me, I want to be able to follow the money.
I think we all can agree that we'd like to be able to follow the money, especially when you're talking about attack ads that could influence the outcome of an election. Now, Matt, you mentioned a constitutional amendment. I'm assuming you're talking about an amendment to our Texas state constitution. Would that be correct?
So we're actually talking about the U.S. Constitution. We have a 50-state operation, and we are fighting hard to get Texas ready to ratify, along with 22 other states that are already ready to ratify. So we're working very hard. It's a very serious matter to amend the Constitution, and I do not take that lightly. I am a constitutionalist. I've always considered myself such. I got my start with Ron Paul, to give you an idea.
I like
So
Ron
I
Paul.
am, you will find no stauncher defender of the Constitution than I. What the problem is that the Constitution has been perverted.
Sure.
It has been interpreted in a way that allows unlimited donations from all over the world to influence our elections, and that's not what the founders intended. For 200 years, things were the way that we're trying to make them. For 200 years, states oversaw state campaign finance for state elections, and Congress did so for federal elections. And that's what we're trying to bring it back to. So for 200 years, we did it that way. The last 50 or 60, we've been doing it a different way. And I think it's pretty obvious to Americans that we're not going down the right road. Political corruption seems to be on the upswing. Insider trading is an issue. We need to level the playing field and empower the grassroots by supporting the For Our Freedom Amendment is what it's called.
For Our Freedom Amendment. And if you could get into kind of the language of what this amendment would entail, tell us in maybe one sentence what the amendment would accomplish.
Yeah, so we mentioned disclosure. We mentioned, being able to have transparency and follow the money. Right now, even if the state of Texas wanted to, there's little to nothing that we could do without the Supreme Court striking us down. I spoke to a state senator who sounded like he had a great bill that would limit or prevent PACs that get more than 50% of their money from out of state from participating in the elections in Texas. And of course, the problem with that is it sounds like a step in the right direction, but the Supreme Court wouldn't let it stand. They have a very narrow interpretation, and they're going to stick to it. There are court cases working their way through the process, but we're not holding our breath for them to overturn themselves. But I do want to tell you about that court case because it's a real life example of how this affects state sovereignty. So the state of Maine had a public referendum, and it caught the eye of a Canadian company that decided that it was worth $90 million to come in and buy up all the TV time they could, leaving Mainers with little to no time to respond. They succeeded temporarily in that referendum, and Mainers turned around and said, you know what, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to assert our state sovereignty. They introduced a new referendum that won 86% of the vote, saying we're not going to let a foreign company do this again. After that resounding defeat to the Canadian company, what did they do? They turned around and filed suit. And they said they enjoy the same protections as Americans and American companies when it comes to political speech based on the Supreme Court's current interpretation. So they're still fighting that. Like I said, we're not holding our breath. We're doing the work necessary to win the For Our Freedom Amendment, regardless of the outcome.
Well, just on the surface, I think it's a point on which both Democrats and Republicans can agree. There are very few things that Democrats and Republicans tend to agree on, especially in today's polarized world. But I think the idea that too much money is influencing politics is something that if I grabbed a couple of Democrats, again, from off the street, or grabbed a couple of Republicans, most would agree that we have entirely too much money changing hands in politics. When you talk about billions of dollars being spent in presidential campaigns, or on a much more local level, millions of dollars being spent in Texas House races, that screams trouble to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because the polling is very clear. And Texans support the For Our Freedom Amendment overwhelmingly with 76%. That includes
Wow.
75% of Republicans. The reason there's not a big difference between those two numbers is because of what you just said. It's across the board. You talk to Democrats, I could show you the polling. It's almost the exact same. So ironically, the right and the left have both seen the same thing. The grassroots gets routinely railroaded.
Yep.
And that means conservatives and progressives might actually have something that we can agree on. And frankly, it's all about, I want to have a fair fight with our counterparts. And right now, we're just not able to do that. There's a third party interfering every time to determine the outcome.
And that's money.
Yes,
That's
sir.
money. It is.
It's
And
big
Matt,
money, multinational corporations. It's George Soros. It's a lot of folks. Frankly, George Soros isn't even the biggest offender. There's another gentleman whose name is a little difficult to pronounce, but he's from one of the Scandinavian countries, and I mean, he makes George Soros look like child's play.
really?
So it's not so much about, one individual or one company. It's about a systemic problem that undermines what it means to be an American, that the power is derived from we the people. And we've just got to do something. And fortunately, there's a historic movement happening all over the country and across Texas to do it.
Matt, you mentioned the grassroots being railroaded, and I'll give you another instance in which I firmly believe the grassroots is routinely railroaded, and that is representation as far as getting to elected office. Hear me out on this. This is probably a wildly unpopular opinion, and when I first say it, you're probably going to shake your head in disagreement. I don't think we pay our state legislators enough, and let me tell you why. So the salary of a Texas state legislator is $7,200. Okay. That is substantially below the poverty line. What does that do in practical terms? Well, I think we could both agree that being a state representative is essentially a full-time job. People cannot survive on an income of $7,200. Yet at the same time, they can't ask their employer to allow them to leave work for 6 months every 2 years in order to perform their official duties as a state representative. So what does that do? It sets up a situation where essentially in the Texas state legislature, you have a body that is comprised mostly of people who either come from wealth, generational wealth, they own a business that they can have somebody else run while they're in Austin, or they're perhaps a lawyer who has a firm that can do their business while they're gone. So what it does is it sets this bar of elites, the ruling class, basically having fealty over everybody else, and regular grassroots, everyday people who need to work a 9 to 5 full-time job can't run for office because they have an obligation to their employer. So if we were to pay a living wage, something reasonable to our state representatives, it would empower the grassroots, whether they be conservatives or liberals, to run for office. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it makes it all the more ridiculous at how many millions we spend for these $7,200 jobs, right? And it speaks to the issue, I think, at hand. I sympathize with what you're saying. I'm a populist at heart, and I don't want to disenfranchise anyone who would be a good state representative. So I think that discussion is good to have. I don't know the last time that they increased that salary. I know it's
1975.
a very unpopular thing to do, and with the unbelievable inflation we've had recently, with upwards of 20%, I think we could, at least on a personal note, I think you could talk about adjusting to inflation.
Well, and it's unpopular. You're right that it's unpopular. The idea of us paying our politicians more money is unpopular, but I don't think the argument has been properly phrased. And I don't think most people understand that for 6 months every 2 years, our representatives are in Austin. They can't have a full-time job and work for, an employer while also being a state representative. So I think if you arm people with all the relevant facts, there's a good argument to be made to pay them a reasonable salary so that we can have a wider variety of people from various socioeconomic levels running for office and being elected. People who, are like you and I, grassroots activists.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, one aspect to it is we have a part-time legislature. I don't know, how historic that is. I know there were reasons for it. So, you could, on one hand, justify that Texas legislators get paid less than other states because they have full-time, we have part-time. They convene, as once for 6 months every other year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's
So,
correct.
perhaps that could be part of the discussion as well.
How often they meet, because you and I both know that even if they're not in Austin officially in session for those 6 months, they're working. I mean, they are working, whether it be on their campaign or whether it be on actual bills and issues while they're at home. It is a full-time job. And I've gotten to know several of them very well over the course of the past year. And this is a concern that I've heard from multiple people. In the past, I would have immediately said, no, I don't like this idea of paying our representatives more. One of the benefits of being a subscriber to my Facebook page is that my subscribers get an opportunity to ask in advance questions that they would like me to present to guests that I bring on to interview. And Kim wants to know what election laws currently exist that help keep dark money out of politics. And her concern is that Democrats already don't tend to abide by the law. So what makes American Promise think that something like this would actually move the needle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, the dark money issue is really a one size fits all approach from the Supreme Court on all 50 states. So there's very little that can be done at the state level unless we win before our Freedom Amendment. Um, as far as what could be done once we get the amendment done, I mentioned that state senator who has a bill that would limit PACs who get more than half of their money from out of state from influencing Texas elections. That's an example of some legislation that would be possible once we win the For Freedom Amendment.
Okay, Matt, how can people get involved if this is a cause that somebody wants to get behind? Where can they go to learn more? Tell us.
Go to americanpromise.net and you can click on Texas and see the polling for Texas. You can sign the citizen pledge. We also have a candidate pledge for candidates and elected officials. And you can just email me, matth@americanpromise.net. I would love to get in touch with you and talk about how you can best assist.
We'll go ahead and put that up on the screen. Matt, I want to thank you for taking time to come on tonight and discuss what I believe, along with you, is a very important issue.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to making history together. Thank you for the time and consideration.
Amen. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas. Stay dialed in to interviews and content just like this by clicking that follow button on my Facebook page, or hit the subscribe button to learn more about exclusive access that you won't want to miss.